Hi, everyone. Vasu Vaddiparty here with the VPartySports Podcast for January 14th, 2023. Wildcard weekend upon us. It's 9 a.m. on the East Coast, 6 a.m. on the West Coast. Of course, if you're catching us at the first hour, we'll have replays to follow as well, too. VPartySports Podcast is also going to be here tomorrow, Sunday morning at the same time, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific. Don't forget the Daily Post at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. If you're interested in sponsorship opportunities, contact me directly through Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, the VPartySports Podcast with Vasu Vaddiparty. You can reach me at VPartySports on all social media. All right, let's get into it. Big day in the NFL this weekend. The regular season is over. We are at wildcard scenarios coming up this weekend. As we said yesterday, we had Jen Mueller on from the Seattle Seahawks radio breaking down the 49ers and Seahawks games. Unfortunately, we didn't get Russell Baxter from Pro Football Talk, ProFootballGuru.com, and Football Talk Seriously. Unfortunately, he was unable to be with us, but maybe down the road we'll get him for the playoffs. So we'll do our own preview. We'll break it down by the numbers, by the point spreads, by the overs and unders, the numbers that you are interested in by tuning into this show, the VPartySports Podcast. All right, let's get to it. Right away, the NFL. 6 games this weekend, 2 today, 3 tomorrow, 1 Monday night. In this order, starting at 4:30 Eastern, the San Francisco 49ers, the number 2 seed, will host the Seattle Seahawks, the number 7 seed, a 10-point favorite for San Francisco, 42 the total. Tomorrow night, Saturday night actually, 8:15, the Los Angeles Chargers are 2.5-point favorites at Jacksonville, 47.5. Sunday, the first game at 1 o'clock on CBS, the Buffalo Bills, 14-point favorites, 43.5 is the total. The Minnesota Vikings are hosting the New York Giants. They're a 3-point favorite against the number 6 seeded New York Giants, 48 the total. Cincinnati and Baltimore on Sunday night. Cincinnati 8.5 against Baltimore, 40.5 the total. And on Monday night, the Dallas Cowboys, a 2.5-point favorite at Tampa Bay, 45.5. Now, what's common about these games is that all 6 games are all played by teams that have played each other at least once this year. And in the case of the 49ers and Seahawks, that's a division game. 49ers swept both games 27-7 and 21-13 versus Seattle. The Buffalo Bills lost the first game to Miami back in week 3, 21-19. That was when the Ken Dorsey famous film in the offensive coordinator's booth, him throwing the computer around and the notebook around for not being able to convert on 4th down there. And then Buffalo, behind Tyler Bass, got a game-winning field goal with 8 seconds to go, and they were able to even that series up. But Buffalo, of course, the game that got canceled on Monday night, they're the 2 seed. Miami, the 7 seed in this scenario. The Chargers are the 5th seed. Jacksonville, by virtue of their division, the 4th seed. How about Jacksonville beating up on Tennessee last week? They were very physical, and I think they can give the Chargers a tough time as well, too. But anyway, Buffalo-Miami plays for a 3rd time. And then the Ravens and the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals are playing for the 3rd time out of the AFC North. The Ravens won on a Justin Tucker kick back in week 4. And then the Bengals blew out Baltimore. No Lamar Jackson last week. He's out again this week for Baltimore, 40.5 the total. Now, opening night on Sunday night, the Dallas Cowboys hosted the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Dak Prescott got hurt in that game. Tampa Bay's defense came through, 19-3 the score in that game. Not a lot of offense, and that was a foretelling sign for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their offense, as they have not scored a lot of points this year. Tom Brady, 7-0 against the Cowboys. 7-0 against the Cowboys. A lot of that with New England, but also the one game this year as well, too. The only other time they were a home underdog was against the Cincinnati Bengals this season in his Tampa Bay career, and they got blown out by Cincinnati. Cincinnati went on that unbelievable run, and they went into Tampa and beat them up. Tampa had a lead at one point, but Cincinnati rolled that up. So Cincinnati, Baltimore, Buffalo, Miami, San Francisco, Seattle, all division games, 3rd time they're playing each other. Jacksonville got a 2-point conversion at home against the Chargers early in the year. They won that game 28-27. So they've got that in their favor. They're very physical. They can run the ball right now. They've got a pass rush. We know the Chargers had offensive line problems. Now they're going to be without Mike Williams, their talented wide receiver. He's out for the game as well. But you've got Justin Herbert, one of the best in the game, one of my favorites in the game. And the line went from -1 to 2.5 in that scenario. So I'm not sure exactly why the Bunny's going on the Chargers. Maybe Jacksonville's too inexperienced. But I like Trevor Lawrence. I like Travis Etienne Jr. I like Christian Kirk. I like Zay Jones. I like their defense. I like their pass rush. Their secondary has been outstanding. They're in a 5-game winning streak. They thumped the Titans twice, including last weekend in Jacksonville. Were able to win the division because of that, and nobody else out of the AFC South. Of course, Tampa Bay out of the NFC South. Both divisions really stunk it up this year. Carolina Panthers had a chance on Tampa Bay, but it is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Jacksonville, 2.5-point underdog to the Chargers, 47.5 the total. The New York Giants made a furious comeback and rally to tie the game down 10 against the down 11 against the Vikings. Late in that game, they get a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to tie it. And then Minnesota gets a 60-yard game-winning field goal by Greg Joseph to win it. Giants were 4.5-point underdogs at that game. I think they were 4.5-point underdogs. They did cover that game. So as I look at these, San Francisco 2-0 versus Seattle, covered the spread twice. Jacksonville is an underdog, covered the spread against the Chargers. Miami covered the spread both times as an underdog to Buffalo. And the Giants covered against Minnesota. The Bengals covered twice against Baltimore. They were 3.5-point underdog when Justin Tucker made that kick. So they're 2-0 versus Baltimore against the spread. And then Tampa Bay 1-0 against Dallas. They beat them 19-3. They were an underdog in that game, I believe, and Tampa Bay came back and beat them. They were a 3 or 4-point underdog in that game to Dak Prescott. He got hurt. He came back after the Cooper Rush experiment, and he did not have a good second half to Dak Prescott, and that showed last week in the Washington game. All right, you look at it individually. Seattle was beaten by San Francisco twice. Brock Purdy 5-0 as a starter. Geno Smith, this is according to Jen Mueller from the Seahawks radio. I did not know this. I hadn't even thought about this. Geno Smith was under center for every snap this year. And what a year he's had. He turned himself into a Pro Bowl quarterback. Unbelievable the year that Geno Smith has when he was the laughingstock in New York for all those years. Came to Seattle, Russell Wilson's backup. They made him the man this year after trading Russell Wilson during the summer or last year before free agency. And lo and behold, he's in the playoffs. Now, they did need help to get into the playoffs. They started off 6-3. Then they went 1-3 in that stretch to go 7-6, and then 2-2 to close out the year. A game-winning overtime kick by Jason Myers last week after he had doinked one to win it in regulation from 46 yards. This one was 53 yards, and he made it. They beat the Rams 19-16. They needed help from the Lions. How about Dan Campbell and the Lions? They were already eliminated by virtue of the fact that a Week 4 game in Detroit that ended up being 48-45 in favor of Seattle has the tiebreaker favoring Seattle over Detroit, because that would have thrown it all into chaos. But that win over Detroit gave them the tiebreaker. But give Detroit credit. They did not lay down for Green Bay last Sunday night, and they went into Green Bay and they beat them, and they beat them up bad. Jared Goff looked really good. Jamal Williams, the former Packer, he looked really good, and they've got receivers. That team is going to be a contender next year, but they're not in the playoffs. Seattle gets in. They've got the 49ers. George Kittle burned them for 2 touchdowns last week. Seattle running game has been non-existent, especially against San Francisco. Their run defense was not very good this year as well either. In the 6-3 start, they were pretty good, but the first 4 games, they averaged nearly 160 yards rushing allowed. So you got to think that McCaffrey's going to be a key for them, but they've got a lot of weapons to the 49ers and Deebo Samuel. George Kittle, what a second half, what a last quarter of the season he had. 5 touchdowns, including the one last week against Arizona, the 2 against Seattle. Just phenomenal the year that George Kittle has had. The running game for Seattle needs to get going. They've got to get pressure on Purdy. The linebackers have had a rough year this year, but that secondary is real good with Woolen and Diggs and 2 of the 4 in the back there in the defensive backfield there. They can give some problems to a quarterback who has not been under the pressure of a playoff game as Brock Purdy has. Don't make no mistake about it. I'm very high on Brock Purdy. I was the only one during the summer, myself and a local broadcaster named Larry Kruger here, were very high on Brock Purdy. I watched him play all 4 years at Iowa State, and you could tell that he had the maturity, he had the vision, and he had the smarts to be the starter if he ever got the chance. Mr. Irrelevant is very relevant right now for the San Francisco 49ers. 5-0 as a starter. By the way, the Seahawks are going to face all three starting quarterbacks that started the game against them. They got Trey Lance in week 2. He was injured, gone for the year. Jimmy Garoppolo came in. He got hurt against Miami. Brock Purdy came in. He started the last Seattle game in Seattle on Thursday night. And now he's going to start this game against Seattle. Garoppolo started the game against Seattle the second time. That's not true. Started all three quarterbacks. Garoppolo started. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, they faced all three quarterbacks of the Seattle Seahawks. And then Geno Smith has taken every snap under center. Weather's going to be a factor here in Santa Clara. I live in the area, so I can comment on the weather. It's a 10-point favorite for San Francisco. They beat them up twice. They've covered both times. See if it's a different ball game. I don't like going over 7 in these games in the playoffs, especially because it's tough with a touchdown plus on a favorite to go in the NFL. San Francisco, they had their secondary problems. The Raiders tore them apart defensively. Arizona was nowhere near as healthy as they were last week. But you're looking at Tyler Lockett and DJ Metcalf as your two receivers for Seattle. Their running game with Walker the third, DJ Dallas the third string back. But you got to think that they're going to be able to try and get that running game, or they're going to try and get that running game going. And they've got to protect Geno Smith. In 2 games against San Francisco, he's been hit 18 times, 9 times in each game. So that's a little look at San Francisco. Seattle, let's move on to the Jaguars. They beat the Chargers early in the year. They came in as an underdog at home. They've won 5 in a row. Mike Williams, as we said, out for L.A. Travis Etienne runs the ball well. The rookie offensive lineman for the Chargers, they were injured middle of the year. They've got to protect Justin Herbert from the pass rush. If they can do that, they've got a shot at winning this game. 5 in a row, and from the depths of nowhere, 2-6 to start the year. Here they are, 9-8 to close out the year. Doug Peterson, he better get Coach of the Year. He better get Coach of the Year run as far as the NFL awards ceremonies go, because he deserves it for what he's done. Of course, he's a former Super Bowl winner with the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, we talked about Buffalo, Miami. The major highs coming off the Damar Hamlin saga, coming back to really good stories. He's released from Cincinnati. He came back to Buffalo last weekend. He was in the hospital last weekend watching the game. They have Sunday ticket in Cincinnati hospitals. I have to figure that out. But anyway, he sees Nyheim Hines open the game off with a kickoff return. Can you talk about storybook endings? Film scripts were written off this. 2 kickoff returns by Hines. They were down when the second one happened. They never looked back. The key to Josh Allen, he cannot turn the ball over in the red zone. He's done that too many times. He leads the NFL in red zone turnovers this year, whether it's interceptions or fumbles. Tua Tagovailoa is out for the Dolphins again. The concussion syndrome is getting them hard. Skylar Thompson, who got the Dolphins into the playoffs last week, no touchdowns against the hapless Jets. 11-6 the final. Don't get me started on that. The safety at the end of the game covered the 3.5 points for Miami. If you had the Jets, you did not like that last play sequence by Joe Flacco and the New York Jets. And, of course, Mike LaFleur, the offensive coordinator, fired by the Jets for not scoring a touchdown in the last 3 games. We'll see where he ends up. They split the season series, and both games were close. Miami winning the first one on a 4th down defensive stand. Tyler Bass as an 8-point favorite for the Buffalo Bills. Game-winning field goal with 8 seconds left to give Buffalo the win, 32-39. All right, we move on. The number 3 Minnesota Vikings in the NFC. They're the second game on Sunday. Greg Joseph's 60-yard field goal thwarted a New York Giants comeback, down 11 points to tie the game. Joseph gets the 60-yard field goal, allows the Vikings to win 13 games. They lose the tiebreaker to the 49ers. Thus, they are the 3 seed. They'll get 1 home game. Giants can run the ball. Saquon Barkley, he looks like he's back. Daniel Jones has had a great year. He can run the ball as well, too. But his passing has been outstanding. And they've got receivers on that team this year that have been really, really good, of course. But it's Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley leading the way. The Giants' defense, especially the secondary, has picked up the last few weeks. But they got to figure out how to get the pass rush going. They got to stop Dalvin Cook, Madison in the backfield as well, too, especially near the goal line and in the red zone. It's going to be a major accomplishment for the Giants to go into Minnesota and beat them twice. And now the point spread is lower than it was the first time. It's down to 3, with the total being at 48. The game didn't go over last time. It was 27. It did go over, 27-24 on the Greg Joseph field goal, 60-yard field goal there. All right, Sunday night, the Bengals throttled the Ravens last week. Anthony Brown was the quarterback. Lamar Jackson's out. Tyler Huntley still questionable in terms of playing, but Brown's the one that started. Nearly made a major comeback for Baltimore against Cincinnati. Baltimore can rush the passer. That's one thing that they can do. They can stop the run. They're going to have to key on Mixon. Their secondary, big question. You got Chase, you got Higgins, you got Boyd, you got Hunter Henry. Not Hunter Henry. You got the other tight end that's there at Cincinnati, but they can throw the ball. And of course, Joe Burrow, he's had trouble staying upright. The offensive line has given up more sacks than they've ever given for him. Of course, he got hurt 2 years ago with the big hit by the Washington Redskins at the time. The Washington football team at the time was the one that hurt Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow and Alex Smith both got hurt in that same game, and both ended up being out for the rest of the year. Joe Burrow, of course, came back later, and then Alex Smith's career went awry, and he ended up retiring after all the surgeries that he had. But anyway, Bengals, Ravens, third time they meet. Justin Tucker, game-winning field goal, week 4, 19-17. Last week, 28-15, 28-16. The Ravens lose to Cincinnati. So Cincinnati's covered twice, once as an underdog, once as a favorite. They're 8.5, and 40.5 is the total. 40.5 is the total. No Lamar Jackson, so you got to think it's going to be tough for Baltimore to score. An underplay might be good there. Don't forget Daily Post at 11 o'clock a.m. today, 8 o'clock a.m. Eastern. The college basketball will be broken up into 4 groups for all day of conference play in the NCAA hoops action today. But we'll get to that after the break. Last game to talk about right now, the Monday night game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Only the second time they're a home underdog this year. Second time that Tom Brady's been a home underdog in a number of years. But he's 7-0 versus the Cowboys all time. They run. We saw their offense all year, could not score touchdowns. They had a tough time running the ball. Brady made plays when he had to, but he's got his receivers back. He's got his tight ends back. They've got a pretty good running game, but it's going to be up to Brady, who's 7-0, the GOAT versus America's team. I hate to say that because I'm not a fan of either team, but that's where we're at in Dallas. Even the way Dak Prescott's been playing the last few weeks, he tied for the league lead in interceptions, and he missed 4 games. 4 games he missed, and he's still tied for the league lead in interceptions. And that game against Washington last week was horrendous. Fuller with the pick 6 for Washington to increase the lead and force Dallas to the loss. 27-7 was the score. They were a 7-point favorite. Didn't even come close to covering. And Washington was not even a playoff factor in terms of the NFC. They were already eliminated based on what happened on Saturday, based on what happened the week before with the tie with the Giants as well. Few weeks back, the Giants beat them again too, so no Washington in there. But they put it on Dallas, and that makes those Washington fans happy because that's a big rivalry with the old Washington Redskins and Dallas Cowboys. But here are the Buccaneers. They beat Dallas 19-3 in the week 1 opener in Dallas. Prescott got hurt. Cooper Rush came in. Tampa Bay's run defense was outstanding. If they can stop the run this time around, their pass defense has been very good all year. And the way Prescott's been playing, and of course Dallas's history of not making it past the first round, you got to think that that's got to be a tie-in for Tampa Bay here. Protect the pocket from the pass rush. That's what you got to do if you're Dak Prescott. Make sure you get a clean pocket. Make sure you make accurate throws and get that ball downfield. Use your running backs. Pollard only had 19 yards rushing. Where is Ezekiel Elliott? He has not been a factor in the last 6 weeks for the Dallas Cowboys. So you got to think that that's going to be there as well, too. All right, one more time with the lines before we take a break. 49ers are a 10-point favorite, 42 the total. Weather's going to be pretty rainy here in California. Jacksonville, it's going to be very nice. They're a 2.5-point underdog to the Chargers. 47.5 the total there. Those 2 games are on Saturday. Fox will have it at 1:30 Pacific time and 8:15 Eastern time for Jacksonville and the Chargers. Sunday morning, West Coast time, 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock on the East in Miami. In Buffalo, 14-point favorites for the Buffalo Bills, 43.5. Can you imagine if they bring DeMar Hamlin out or put him on the video board? I tried to talk him into doing it last week to really raise the roof of that stadium, but I would not want to be Miami this week, especially if Hamlin's there or Hamlin somewhere in the facility to watch the game. 43.5 the total. Skylar Thompson, the starter for Miami. Minnesota, 3-point favorite over the New York Giants. Game-winning field goal the last time they played, 27-24. 10 wins for the Minnesota Vikings. Let's see if I had that right. Vikings had 10 wins. Where was this stat that I had right here? Giants. The Vikings had 10 wins by one-score games. So that's where they were at from that standpoint. So you got to figure that this is going to be a one-score game as well, too. Is 3 enough for Minnesota, or can the Giants cover that as well, too? All right, so 3-48 for Minnesota. Cincinnati, 8.5 over Baltimore. No Lamar Jackson. They've covered twice against Baltimore this year. Baltimore's defense has got to step up. Don't underestimate the Ravens. John Harbaugh, a very good playoff coach. And then the Dallas Cowboys on Monday night, 2.5-point favorites at Tampa Bay, 45.5 the total. Brady 7-0 against the Cowboys in his career, including the Week 1 Sunday night game where they beat them 19-3 in Dallas that night. All right, that's the NFL preview. We'll have our selections for the best bets, 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern, 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific. Of course, the replays will go on for this show as well, too. When we come back in 30 seconds, I'll look back at the NBA Friday, a little bit of Saturday NBA, but mostly NCAA basketball. Conference play abounds as we are in week 3 of the year for college basketball. All conferences, all going, all tomorrow around the football. And then, of course, some NBA to talk about as well, too. We'll throw in some NHL as well. Did you see the game between Seattle and Boston the other night in hockey? Boston's only loss at home, their 5th loss at home to the Seattle Kraken. What a game that was. All right, back with the NBA and college basketball. A little hockey before we shut down for this Saturday. Don't forget, we'll be back on Sunday, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, the NFL preview of Sunday's games, the review of Saturday's games, NBA, NCAA, NHL, recaps and previews. Of course, the Daily Post at 11 a.m. Eastern. Sponsorships available. Contact me directly on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at VPartySports. You can get to me that way. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Vasu Vaddiparty is where you'll find me, the VPartySports. All right, in 30 seconds, the NBA, NCAA basketball, and all that conference play, and a little bit of the NHL before we say sayonara for this Saturday, the 14th of January in 2023. Back in 30 seconds. Welcome back to the VPartySports Podcast. I'm your host, Vasu Vaddiparty, for this Saturday, January 14th, 2023. If you missed any of the previous podcasts, we just previewed all 6 of the NFL games for Wildcard, Super Wildcard weekend. The Philadelphia Eagles have the 1 seed in the NFC. The Kansas City Chiefs have the 1 seed in the AFC. The other 6 teams will play out this Wildcard weekend for a chance to go play. And don't forget, after each round, the NFL reseeds the team. So the lower seed will always play the higher seed, and so on all the way through. So we're looking at 6 games this weekend, 4 next weekend, conference championship weekend in 2 weeks from now, and then the Super Bowl on February 12th from Glendale, Arizona. By the way, speaking of the conference championship, because of that Buffalo-Cincinnati game, they did not get to play a 17-game schedule. If Buffalo had won that game, they would have been the 1 seed. The Chiefs would have been the 2 seed by virtue of a victory against Kansas City. Cincinnati was the other team there. If they had beaten Buffalo and they had already beaten the Chiefs as well this year, they could have gotten into the AFC Championship game as well too. Though Kansas City would have been the home team for that game, as Buffalo would have been the 1 seed. Cincinnati would have stayed at the 3 seed. But here's a little note: the AFC title game. Both teams play outside, so I don't understand what the NFL is doing. They're going to play this game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. They're going to play the AFC Championship game on a neutral site between the Bills and the Chiefs. I get the neutral site. I get what the ramifications were. But why are you playing indoors when both teams play outdoors? I don't get it. We're going to have Darren Smith on, of Chiefs pregame and postgame host, next week at some point, and we'll talk about this neutral site game if the Bills and Chiefs end up in the title game. Now, if both teams don't get there, then it's going to be a status quo as far as where the game will be played. But two outside teams playing inside in Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium. All right, once again, the NFL schedule. San Francisco, Seattle opens up on Saturday on Fox, 4:30 Eastern, 8:15 Eastern. Jacksonville Jaguars host the Chargers on NBC. By the way, Al Michaels going to do that game for NBC. Nice to see Al back on regular TV. Had a great year with Kirk Herbstreit on Prime Video. I'm sure most of you watched on Thursdays. Buffalo, Miami, the first game on Sunday from Buffalo, 1 o'clock on CBS. Minnesota, 3-point favorite over the Giants. That'll be 4:15 on Fox. And then 8:15 on Sunday night from Cincinnati. The Ravens and the Bengals will go. And then Monday night on ESPN, 8:15, the time for that, Eastern time. Dallas will visit Tampa. Dallas, a 2.5-point favorite, 45.5. Tom Brady, a home underdog. All right, let's get to the NBA here a little bit. Let's run through Friday's games a little bit. New Orleans beat Detroit 116-110. They cover the 5.5. Atlanta gets a game-winning shot by John Collins at the buzzer. Beats Indiana 113-111. Indiana without Halliburton, but they cover again at home. They are a good team, especially when they're a dog at home, but they've been covering games when they're at home, so keep that in mind. Knicks came back on the Wizards. They were down big to Washington in the first half, and then they had a big lead late. But Kyle Kuzma gets a basket at the end to cover. I'd seen the line of 4.5. I know it went down to 3, so if you had +3 for Washington, you still lost. If you had +4.5 like I did early in the afternoon, you ended up winning thanks to Kyle Kuzma. By the Oklahoma City Thunder, they're the best team as an underdog in basketball. They go into Chicago. They're a 4.5-point underdog, and they tear up the Bulls, 124-110. Josh Giddey had 22. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the best player nobody's ever heard of, had 21. But the Thunder, again, an underdog victory, a victory as an underdog, as they go in and just rout the Bulls by 14. And the Utah Jazz hold off the Magic. They were a 6-point favorite, 112-108. The game of the night was in San Antonio at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio. 68,323 saw the Golden State Warriors take on the San Antonio Spurs. It set a record that was set in 1998 when Michael Jordan and the Bulls played the Atlanta Hawks at the Georgia Dome, the newly created Georgia Dome. That's about 6,277 more, if my math is correct. Golden State won 144-113 after that horrific loss on Tuesday night to Phoenix. They come back and roll 144 points. Told you on yesterday's show that San Antonio gives up a lot of points and they go over a lot. Well, 144 is a good indication considering how Phoenix really drubbed the Warriors. Curry's coming back slowly. He had a good game tonight as well. Jordan Poole had 25 for Golden State. And then two final games. Timberwolves beat the Suns. That's a push at -5. I saw it go up to -6. Anthony Edwards had 31. T-Wolves beat the Suns 121-116. And how about the Denver Nuggets? They might be the best team in the NBA. Boston may have something to say about that, but the Nuggets continue to roll. They didn't even have Nikola Jokic play today, and they beat the Clippers by 12, and they dominated that second half against Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, mind you, Michael Porter Jr. had big buckets. Aaron Gordon had big buckets. Jamal Murray, a couple of key threes. They were on fire. KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, had big baskets as well, too. So the Clippers, 115-103 losers to a Jokic-less Denver Nuggets, who are number 1 in the Western Conference right now. And the Sacramento Kings sweep a 2-game series. They go over in both games. They cover both games. 9.5-point spread tonight. 239.5 the total. That was up 4 points from Wednesday night, 139-114. And that's your NBA roundup. Coming up on Saturday, 7 games, including Miami hosting Milwaukee. That's a 1 o'clock Eastern game. That's on ABC. National game. They're not going to put basketball up against football on Saturday night with the playoffs going. So that's your Saturday game of the week, is the Milwaukee Bucks visiting Miami. We don't have any lines yet for the games. They haven't come out yet. But check out the Daily Post. We'll have all the lines and we'll have all the best bets for Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Jazz hosting the 76ers. Raptors host the Hawks. The Cavaliers go to Minnesota. Grizzlies will visit Indiana. Watch out. Memphis, Indiana plays well at home, but no Halliburton. That's a big difference. And then the Boston Celtics will visit Charlotte. Friday night in the NBA, the Dogs were 5-3, one push 4 overs and 4 unders. My record, a 3-1 with 1 push today, 1-2 in college basketball. So a 4-3 day for me. We'll have the updated totals and updated daily totals as well on the Best Bets Daily Post, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. And then Saturday, the NHL, 14 games, including Toronto and Boston, Pittsburgh and Carolina, Washington hosts Philadelphia, the red-hot Seattle Kraken, who just beat Boston on the road. They go visit my Blackhawks. St. Louis hosts Tampa Bay. Las Vegas will host Edmonton, and the Hot Kings host the equally hot New Jersey Devils Saturday night in L.A. If there wasn't football, if there wasn't other things going on with basketball, I might take a trip to L.A. and go see the New Jersey Devils and the L.A. Kings play. I'm sure everybody's excited for that game. Both teams playing well right now. One more break. We're going to hit the college basketball scene. We're going to hit all the conferences, go through all the games, a few games to talk about on Friday night, but mostly the lines are out, and we'll get to them in 30 seconds with the NCAA roundup for this Saturday, another weekend of conference games. I'm Vasu Vaddiparty. This is a VParty Sports Podcast. We'll see you in 30 seconds. All right, Vasu Vaddiparty here, back with you for the last segment of the VParty Sports Podcast for the Saturday, January 14th of 2023. We are in week 3 of conference play for college basketball. This is the most exciting part of the year as far as college basketball goes for me. I know it's March Madness for a lot of people, but the conference tournaments at the first week of March and then the regular season conference games for the major conferences tell you a lot about these teams. It's a good time. I know football is on the mind of a lot of people. It is on mine as well. But when the Super Bowl is over, we get about a month and a half before March Madness takes place, and that's the best time to hit some of these college basketball games. 1-2 tonight for me. Actually, I didn't even see the score. Let me check the score here. I saw Utah State was down to Nevada. That was one of the 3 games I had. So I'll give you the update here right now. It was the Utah State Aggies losing to Nevada in a Mountain West game, 85-70. Dayton lost to Virginia Commonwealth. Michigan State had a 9-point lead. That was one of my games. Illinois came back, beat them by 9, covered the 6. Butler beat Villanova. Villanova's struggling, 79-71 in the Big East. A couple other games, Nebraska, Purdue. Purdue wins by 18. They cover in the Big Ten. Yale loses to Cornell in the Ivy League. And, of course, the Mid-American Conference, the MAC. Not like football where there's points galore. Kent State beat Ohio. And then we've got Eastern Michigan getting drubbed by Akron, 104-67 as well. So that's your Friday college basketball. Let's hit the Saturday college basketball here, conference by conference, just to give you an idea of what's going on. Again, Daily Post at 11 a.m. Eastern. The college basketball every Saturday will be broken down into 4 groups by time segments. So you all have an idea of what time they start. You have a lot of ideas of what games that I'm looking at as far as best bets go. Usually a lot of college basketball games. I like to put everything out there for people to get. All right, we're going to start with the ACC. North Carolina State, 3-point favorite over Miami. Miami's played well. North Carolina State got off to a hot start, but they haven't played very well the last few weeks. 152. UNC and Louisville. Louisville's horrible this year. North Carolina just came off a loss versus Virginia. Pitt at Georgia Tech. Pitt covered against Duke, though they lost to Duke. 8.5-point underdog. They lost by 8. They have Georgia Tech. They're at Georgia Tech, and they're a road favorite. As is Virginia, a road favorite of Florida State. Florida State's not been very good this year at all. We'll look at the standings here as we look at it. Florida State has only like 4 wins, I think, if I remember right, if I remember seeing that right. Florida State is 5-12. Virginia, 12-3. Clemson, they did not cover against Louisville. They've got Duke at home. Duke has not been playing well. They do win at home, but they've had a tough time on the road, and this is a big test for them. Duke at number 24 goes up against Clemson, a 2-point favorite for Clemson. Notre Dame and Syracuse. Syracuse is a 6.5-point favorite versus the Irish. Barely came away with a win against Georgia Tech earlier in the week at home. And then Wake Forest at 12-5 goes up against an 8-9 Boston College team. Standings in the ACC, Clemson, the only undefeated team in the ACC, Miami 5-1, and then Pitt, Wake, Virginia, Duke, and Syracuse, all 4-2 in the ACC. Let's go to the American Conference. The American Conference has a few games going. Tulane, a 2-point favorite over UCF. UCF, a double overtime win against Memphis. They had no business winning that game, but sure enough, they came back, not only covered the two, it took 2 overtimes, and they won by 3, 145 the total. Wichita State, 9.5-point favorite versus Tulsa, 136.5 the total. And then University of Cincinnati, 5-point favorite at SMU, 146 the total of standings. Houston, the only undefeated team, 5-0. Then you've got Tulane, UCF, Temple, all 4-1. Cincinnati, 3-2. Everybody else at 500 or under 500. All right, we move on to the Big Ten. Only one game in the Big Ten. They had 2 games on Friday night. Purdue with the big victory over Nebraska, 73-55, and then Illinois on the comeback against Michigan State, 75-65. One game in the Big Ten. It's a doozy. Number 18, Wisconsin visits Bloomington to take on the Indiana Hoosiers. IU, a 4.5-point favorite, 10-6 versus Wisconsin, 11-4. Standings in the Big Ten. Purdue 5-1. They lost to Rutgers a week and a half ago. Michigan State, after their loss, 4-2, tied with Rutgers. Then you got Northwestern, Wisconsin, Michigan, all 3-2. Purdue, Illinois, Iowa, 3-3. And then down there, Indiana, 1-4 in conference play, tied with Minnesota, who got their first win in conference play with a major upset at Ohio State on Thursday night. So that's your Big Ten look right there. One game. It's Indiana and Wisconsin. Very interesting to see what the research will say in that. We move on to the Big 12. Big 12 will have Oklahoma, who's played very well under Porter Moser. This is his second year at the helm at Oklahoma after leading Loyola Chicago the last few years. But they've got West Virginia. They're a 4-point favorite. TCU had an unbelievable game against Texas last week, and then they had a great game against who did they play last Saturday? They played, I'll tell you in a second here. They played Iowa State. They lost at a buzzer beater to Iowa State last week on Saturday, and then they had a lead against Texas, and they ended up losing that game. They covered both games. Actually, they didn't cover the Iowa State game. They did cover the Texas game. They did cover against Baylor a few weeks ago, but they're 5.5 against a very good Kansas State team who comes in at 15-1, TCU 13-3. By the way, Oklahoma 10-6, as is West Virginia. Kansas has Iowa State. That's going to be a huge game. 1 o'clock Pacific time, 4 o'clock on the East. It's on ESPN Plus. It's not even on regular TV. An 8-point favorite for Kansas. They're 15-1 against an Iowa State Cyclone team that's 13-2. Baylor 11-5 versus Oklahoma State, who's 9-7, and then Texas versus Texas Tech. Texas Tech had a tough loss against TCU earlier in the week as well, too. So they are 10-6. Actually, they didn't play TCU. They didn't play TCU. They played Iowa State. They got run out of the building on Tuesday night by Iowa State. So that's where the Big 12 stands right now. But that Kansas-Iowa State game, TCU-Kansas State game, 2 games to look at in the Big 12. Standings-wise, you look at it, Kansas and Kansas State, Iowa State, all 4-0. Texas 3-1, TCU 2-2, and then Baylor, Oklahoma State, all 1-3. Texas Tech and West Virginia yet to win a conference game in the Big 12. So that's where you're at with the Big 12. We hit the Big East. 2 games in the Big East, Seton Hall, 3 at DePaul, and then Creighton 6.5 over Providence. See how Providence played last week against Connecticut. Very, very good matchup there between Creighton, who started off hot. Creighton lost to UConn last week, but they had them on the ropes. Friday's Big East games, there was one game. Butler as a 1-point underdog. Line went up to +3. Ends up beating Villanova 79-71. Villanova now falls to 8-10, and Butler falls to 11-8. But Saturday, we've got Seton Hall at DePaul and Providence, number 19, at Creighton. Creighton a 7-point favorite in some places, 6.5 here on the screen. Standings-wise, Providence and Xavier both 6-0. Marquette 6-1, playing very well. Connecticut 4-3, and then Creighton 3-3. Then Seton Hall, Butler 3-5, DePaul 2-4, Villanova 2-5, St. John's 2-5, and Georgetown hasn't won a conference game in a year and a half. So that's where we're at with the Big East as well. Let's go to the MAC. The MAC conference. It's not like football, as we said. MAC conference, a few games to go at. Mid-American Conference, we have the Bowling Green versus Western Michigan. Bowling Green, a 2-point favorite there. The Ball State is 10 over Miami, Ohio, 148.5. Buffalo on the road at Central Michigan, 4-point favorite. Toledo and Northern Illinois. Toledo 10-6 is playing up against Northern Illinois, 11.5-point favorite, 5-11 for Northern Illinois. Teams in the MAC right now that are going strong are Kent and Akron, 4-0 and 3-1. Ball State, Bowling Green, Buffalo are all 2-1. The top five in the Mid-American Conference, otherwise known as the MAC. The Missouri Valley Conference, they're a very underrated conference as well, too. Missouri Valley Conference, Murray State, y'all know about John Morant coming from Murray State, but they've got a lot more going on this year. They have had kind of an up and down start. There were some games that they should have won. They're 9-8. They play an Illinois Chicago team who's 9-9. Evansville 4-14 versus Valparaiso, 6-12. Valparaiso the slight favorite there. By the way, Murray State 9-point favorite over Illinois Chicago. Valpo 2 at Evansville. Belmont's really, really good. I had them as one of my picks and the best bets earlier in the week. I watched them play. 4.5-point favorite over a pretty talented Northern Iowa team. I know a lot of people don't watch the Missouri Valley Conference, but take a look at this Belmont team. When they get to the tournament, they're going to be a tough out, however many rounds they get to. I would not put them as a 15 or 16 seed anymore. They're probably going to be a 10 or 11 seed if they keep playing like this. Southern Illinois, the Classic League right now, them and Drake, both 13-5. Southern Illinois is a 11-point favorite versus Illinois State, and Drake a 2.5-point favorite versus Bradley. Bradley 12-6 overall. Conference-wise, Indiana State 6-1. Southern Illinois and Belmont and Bradley and Northern Iowa, all 5-2. And then Missouri State, Drake, Murray State, 4-3 in the Missouri Valley Conference. All right. The Mountain West Conference had a game tonight. Told you Utah State got beat up by Reno. Got beat up badly by Reno. It was by 15, I believe, is what the score was I saw. Pop it up. 85-70, the final score. Nevada over Reno. Nevada at 15-4, Utah State at 14-4, two of the class teams of that league. Saturday's action, UNLV, who's played pretty well conference-wise. They haven't played very well, but they're 12-4 against Colorado State, only a 5.5-point favorite against Colorado State. Fresno State, 3.5-point favorite versus Air Force, 6-10 for Fresno State, 10-7 Air Force. San Diego State, 13-3 against New Mexico, two of the class teams. New Mexico started the year 14-0. Now they've only won one of their last three. San Diego State, an 8-point favorite, 148.5. And then Boise State, a 4.5-point favorite at Wyoming. Boise State atop the conference as well, too, 13-4 against Wyoming at 5-11. Conference standing, San Diego State 4-0, still undefeated. Nevada at 5-1, Boise at 3-1, and then Utah State, San Jose State, both 3-2. My Spartans playing well this year. They're 12-6, 3-2 in the conference. That's my alma mater, for those that don't know. New Mexico, 2-2 in conference play. And then Fresno, UNLV, 1-3, though they're 12-4. Air Force, 1-3, though they're 10-7. Colorado State, 1-4, but they're 9-9. And then Wyoming, 0-4 in conference. And they are 5-11, and they deserve to be right where they're at. All right, so the Mountain West, we've got 4 games in the Mountain West tomorrow. It'll be very interesting to see how that goes. San Diego State, New Mexico, one of the better games in the conference on Saturday. Pac-12. I watched the Pac-12. I watched all the Pac-12 games. Thursday night, USC beat Colorado. Arizona State beat up on Oregon. They were an underdog there. UCLA drubbed Utah. They covered as a favorite. Arizona did not cover 15 points as a favorite against Arizona State. They only beat them by 12. And then Washington beat up on Stanford. Stanford's had a rough start to this year. Saturday, we've got Arizona State at Oregon State. Oregon State's been awful this year, 7-10. Arizona State under Bobby Hurley has played very well, 14-3. Arizona and Oregon, one of the top games of the day in the Pac-12 and in the country. Arizona, 4.5-point favorite on the road at Oregon. That's should be an at symbol, not a V symbol. They're 4.5-point favorite on the road at Oregon. Arizona 15-2, Oregon 9-8. Washington, a 9.5-point favorite. They just beat up on Stanford. As we said, they've got Cal at home, 132.5. UCLA in prime time tomorrow, 12.5-point favorite over Colorado, who's a pretty good team. Kind of surprised that line's high, though they did lose to USC. They had a chance to beat USC. Did the Colorado Buffaloes, 12.5, 37, 137 the total there. Washington State gets a crack at Stanford now. 8-10 Washington State Cougars. Stanford Cardinal 5-11 coming into this game tomorrow night in the Palouse. Utah 12-6 will visit USC, who's 12-5. USC a 4.5-point favorite, 135. Standings wise, in the Pac-12, we've got UCLA at 6-0. They've got Colorado, Arizona State at Oregon State tomorrow, 5-1. Utah, Arizona, USC, all with 2 losses. And then Colorado with 3 losses, or Oregon with 3 losses, Colorado, Washington State, Cal, all with 4 losses. And then Washington, Oregon State, and Stanford round out the bottom. Washington's 2-5, so they got a big win over Stanford. Stanford 0-6 in conference play. All right, the SEC now. We move on to the SEC. Tennessee will host a very struggling Kentucky Wildcats team. Unbelievable how bad they played. Tennessee may be the best team defensively in the SEC. They're right up there at the top right now as far as everybody. They're 14-2. Kentucky is 10-6. They got upset by South Carolina, did Kentucky, earlier in the week, and that game's going to be early in the morning. Tennessee, a 12-point favorite, 131 the total. Mississippi, 5-point favorite versus Georgia. Georgia at home has played well. Georgia's 12-4. Ole Miss is 8-8. It'll be interesting to see how that game goes. But Georgia's been an underdog twice at home and came out with victories, once against Auburn and one against Mississippi State on Wednesday night, actually, their time. Arkansas, 4.5-point favorite in Vanderbilt. Arkansas came off the loss as a 1-point favorite to Alabama. Vanderbilt 8-8. Arkansas 12-4. Vanderbilt had their game on Tuesday, and they played Tennessee, and they played well against Tennessee. Only lost by 9 points to the Tennessee Volunteers. 141.5 the total. Florida 5.5 versus Missouri. Florida 9-7. Missouri 13-3. They played well, but they got drummed up the other day. They got beat up by 18 against Texas A&M on the road. So they're going to look to make a comeback here at Florida. 5.5-point underdog there. LSU at number 4, Alabama. Alabama and Tennessee fighting out for the best teams right now in the SEC. 14-2 for Alabama, 12-4 for LSU. LSU had the close game against Kentucky. They had the game on Tuesday night that they lost to Florida, and now they're trying to rebound from that, a home loss against Florida, against a very talented Alabama Crimson Tide team. 147 the total. You might think that game might go over. Both teams can score. Both teams can shoot. LSU's defense has been off a little bit the last few games. Texas A&M, an 8-point favorite at South Carolina. We just saw what South Carolina did to Kentucky. So Texas A&M, not going to take them lightly, but they are an 8-point favorite. And that seems like a lot in the SEC. 133 the total. And then Auburn, 13-3 against a very good Mississippi State defensively laden team. 12-4, 8-point favorite. The total 127.5. And you can tell how good Mississippi State's defense is by the total there, 127.5. Bruce Pearl likes to run his Auburn guys up and down the court, and they've got shooters all over the place. But you got to think the Mississippi State might shut them down a little bit. 8-point underdog on the road at Auburn against the 13-3 Auburn Tigers team. All right, standings. Alabama and Tennessee are both 4-0. Texas A&M is 3-0. Auburn, Georgia have 1 loss each. Auburn 3-1, Georgia 2-1. Then you got Missouri and Florida 2-2. Vanderbilt, South Carolina 1-2. Kentucky, LSU, Arkansas, Mississippi State 1-3. And then Mississippi trails at the bottom 0-4. So that's where you're at with the SEC. One last one to get to before we get out of here. We'll recap the programming weekend. Sorry we missed Russell Baxter on NFL Preview Weekend. But we'll do our best to maintain it for today and tomorrow as well. WCC, last conference to preview. The WCC, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in the WCC on Saturday. Santa Clara at UOP, 6.5-point favorite at UOP, 150.5 the total. BYU, 10.5-point favorite versus Pepperdine, 150 the total. Gonzaga, 18.5 versus Portland. They're at home, 15-3 versus 9-10 there. By the way, Santa Clara, 14-5, might be the second best team in the conference right now. Those St. Mary's will have something to say about that. Portland and Gonzaga, 15-3 for Gonzaga to Portland's 9-10, 18.5-point favorite, 160. Loyola Marymount, 12-7 versus San Diego, 149.5, 7.5-point favorite for Loyola Marymount. And then a really good game in San Francisco. St. Mary's on the road, a 7.5-point favorite at USF. The total 132. San Francisco's played well, though they did have a loss Thursday night. They were at Portland. They did lose by 5 to the University of Portland. St. Mary's won by 14 over Loyola Marymount. I don't think they covered that game. They did cover that game by a half point. 13.5-point favorite was St. Mary's. So that's going to be one of the better games on Saturday night in the WCC. St. Mary's, San Francisco, Santa Clara, and UOP. UOP 10-9, Santa Clara 14-5. The standings in the WCC: Gonzaga and St. Mary's both 4-0. Pacific 3-1 of their 10-9 record. BYU 3-2. Santa Clara 2-2. Loyola Marymount and San Diego 2-3. Portland 1-3. San Francisco 1-4, but they played close games of their 12-8 record. And then 0-4 for Pepperdine, 7-11 overall in the year. Pepperdine's off to a rough start. So there you have it for college basketball. Big conference day in college basketball. Don't forget, if you're watching us at 9 o'clock, there'll be replays if you missed any of the college breakdowns, the NFL breakdowns. Big day in NFL football, 2 NFL wildcard games, 49ers and Seahawks early, Jaguars, Chargers late, and then Sunday 3 games, which we'll preview Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, right here on the podcast on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Just reach out to Vasu Vaddiparty. Best bets Saturday and also Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Once again, we'll be here Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, with replays to follow up until kickoff and tip-offs. 11 o'clock Eastern for the best bets segment, NFL preview, wildcard weekend, and a review of Saturday's games. NBA, NCAA, NHL as well, too. And, of course, the Daily Post. If you're looking for sponsorships, contact me directly. We'll get there to it. Once again, the NFL lines for the weekend: San Francisco, Seattle tomorrow afternoon, 10-42 for San Francisco. The Chargers are 2.5 at Jacksonville Saturday night in Jacksonville, 47.5. Buffalo 14, 43.5 in Buffalo Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, the early game. Minnesota 3-point favorite over the Giants, 48. Cincinnati 8.5 Sunday night versus Baltimore, 40.5, and then Monday night, Dallas, 2.5 at Tampa Bay, 45.5. Those are your 6 games for the weekend. Philadelphia Eagles, Kansas City Chiefs with 1 seeds, so they have the bye. They sit around this weekend and they wait for the winners to come out. The NFL reseeds after every round, so the lower seed will always get the higher seed. So 3 possibilities for each, the Eagles and the Chiefs, on who they play. All right, that's going to do it for us. A lot of NBA tomorrow. 7 games tomorrow in the NBA. The first one starts at 1 o'clock. College basketball starting at noon all day and all night. All conference play. We just broke it down. If you missed any of it, you want to go conference by conference, you can catch the replays or you can download the podcast anytime on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter at VPartySports. Vasu Vaddiparty here with you. All right, that's going to do it for this Saturday morning. Have a great day. Good luck with your games. Best Bet segment, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll break it down for you for the NFL, NCAA basketball, NBA, and a little bit of the NHL as well, too. And then we'll see you on Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, for a recap of Saturday's action and a preview of all Sunday's action. I'm Vasu Vaddiparty. This is the VPartySports Podcast. Have a great morning. Have a great afternoon. Have a great day. And we will see you on Sunday, 9 a.m. Eastern, right here, wherever you download your podcast.